Emily sank into the worn couch in her tiny apartment, the cushions sagging under her weight, her laptop open but forgotten as she stared blankly at the wall, thinking about how ordinary her life had become, a steady loop of work, solitude, and quiet longing, and how she hadn't felt truly connected to anyone in months, the hum of the city outside her window mixing with the soft tick of her wall clock, each second echoing a reminder of how alone she felt, and then the knock came, soft at first. Tentative, a polite sound that pulled her from her thoughts, and she hesitated before approaching the door, wondering who could be visiting her at this hour, and when she opened it, she was met with the warm, hesitant smile of Lucas, the new neighbor from upstairs who had moved in a few days earlier and who had seemed friendly from the hallway, holding a small plate of cookies wrapped in a simple paper towel, as if it were a peace offering or a small gesture of kindness to break the invisible walls that separated strangers, and his voice, soft and careful, said, "Hi, I thought I'd introduce myself," and for some reason, that simple greeting carried a weight she hadn't expected, and she laughed nervously, feeling a flicker of warmth in her chest that she hadn't realized she was missing, and she stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in, watching as he hesitated for a moment, then stepped across the threshold into her living room, the apartment feeling suddenly lighter with his presence, as if the air itself had shifted, and he set the cookies on the coffee table and sat down on the edge of the couch, careful not to intrude too much, and they began to talk, starting with small things, neighbors, moving in, favorite local spots, the weather, and gradually, Emily found herself sharing more than she had planned, talking about work stress, the loneliness she sometimes felt, the quiet yearning for connection that she had tucked away for months, and Lucas listened, truly listened, his eyes kind and attentive, nodding here and there, offering soft words of understanding, and she felt a strange, comforting sensation, as if her heart had been frozen and someone had turned a gentle key to let it thaw just a little, and she noticed the way his hands rested on his knees, relaxed but careful, the way his eyes flicked to hers with quiet curiosity, the way he laughed softly at her small jokes, not in mockery but in shared amusement, and for the first time in weeks, she forgot about the time, about the emails piling in her inbox, about the silence of her apartment when the lights went out, because the room seemed alive with a warmth she hadn't anticipated, and as they continued to talk, the city outside their window faded into background noise, the hum of traffic and distant sirens blending into a soft rhythm that matched the beat of her newly awakened heart, and Emily found herself stealing glances at Lucas, noticing the way his smile seemed effortless, how his presence made the air feel lighter, how even the faint scent of his cologne, a mix of something fresh and clean, made her stomach flutter, and she wondered, almost fearfully, how someone she had just met could evoke such emotions, a combination of comfort, intrigue, and that delicate pull of attraction that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts wander into dangerous territories of what if, and yet she felt safe, a paradox she didn't question, just allowed to exist, because it felt good, real, and rare. And when Lucas reached for a cookie and offered her one with that easy, genuine smile, she laughed again, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time, breaking the walls she had carefully constructed around her heart, walls built from past disappointments, failed friendships, and unspoken longings, and she noticed herself leaning slightly closer, her knee brushing his accidentally, sending a small, electric jolt up her leg, and both of them froze for a moment, eyes meeting, the air thick with unspoken acknowledgement, neither of them speaking, yet both aware that something unexplainable had passed between them, and then Emily broke the silence with a soft laugh, pretending it had been intentional, and Lucas chuckled, the sound warm and genuine, filling the small apartment like music, and for hours, they shared stories, little anecdotes, and laughter, feeling an ease with one another that she didn't know was possible with someone so new in her life. And she noticed that her walls weren't just chipped, they were starting to crumble, slowly, tenderly, under the gentle force of his presence, and she wondered what it would feel like to have this moment continue, to have him not just visit once, but to have him become a recurring part of her life, someone to share these quiet, perfect nights with, someone to trust, someone to confide in, someone to make her laugh when the world outside was heavy and gray. And as the evening wore on and the city lights began to twinkle through her window like tiny scattered stars, she realized she didn't want him to leave, didn't want the couch to be empty again, didn't want the soft, warm feeling of connection to vanish into nothingness, and Lucas, noticing the contemplative silence settling over her, reached out with a tentative hand, brushing it lightly against hers, a simple gesture that carried an entire world of meaning, and Emily's heart leapt, a mixture of excitement and fear and longing, because she knew, in that instant, that the couch, simple, worn, ordinary, had become the starting point of something extraordinary, a spark that could grow into a fire, a connection that could transform her lonely, gray life into something vibrant and full, and she sat back, trying to steady the rush of emotions swirling inside her. But it was impossible, because the night had opened a door she hadn't known existed, and she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if this feeling would last, but for now, she let herself enjoy it, let herself feel it fully, every flutter of her heart, every small laugh, every gentle glance, knowing that something had begun on that couch, something neither of them had planned, something that could change everything if they were brave enough to follow it. In the days that followed, Emily found herself thinking about Lucas constantly, replaying every word, every smile, every small moment on the couch, and she was surprised by how naturally he had entered her life, how easily he seemed to fit into the quiet rhythm of her days. And soon he began appearing at her apartment with little surprises, sometimes coffee, sometimes a book he thought she might enjoy, sometimes just himself, sitting on the edge of her couch and sharing stories about his life, his childhood, the small things that made him who he was. And Emily listened, fascinated, feeling the weight of her loneliness lifting with each word, each laugh, each glance, and she realized that she had never felt so seen, so understood, in years, that someone could be present without judgment, without expectation, without rushing, and yet there was something unspoken simmering beneath the surface, an invisible pull between them that made her heart race when he laughed at her jokes, when his hand brushed hers by accident, when he tilted his head in curiosity, his eyes warm and bright, and she began to feel a strange mixture of comfort and longing, because she didn't just want to enjoy his company, she wanted to be close to him, to share more, to let him in fully, but fear lingered too, that familiar doubt that whispered she might be getting ahead of herself, that she might be imagining something that wasn't real, that she might be vulnerable in a way she wasn't ready for. And yet she couldn't deny the way her chest tightened every time he leaned toward her, the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her in that quiet, unassuming way that seemed to say he understood things she hadn't even said out loud. And she found herself thinking about him even when he wasn't there, wondering what he was doing, if he was thinking about her too, feeling a strange and wonderful tension that made her laugh at herself, because she hadn't allowed herself to feel this way about anyone in so long, and Lucas, for his part, seemed equally drawn to her, though he never rushed, never pressed, never forced anything, simply existing in a way that made her feel safe, accepted, valued, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the boundaries they had set for themselves began to blur, the friendship growing deeper, richer, more intimate, filled with quiet moments that carried more meaning than either of them dared to speak aloud, and Emily found herself telling him things she had never shared with anyone else, her fears, her hopes, the tiny dreams that seemed silly but mattered to her nonetheless, and he listened genuinely, offering encouragement, understanding, and empathy, and sometimes he would gently touch her arm, or brush a strand of hair from her face, and her heart would leap in her chest, a combination of joy, surprise, and a nervous awareness that this connection was unlike anything she had experienced before. And one evening, as rain drummed softly against her windows, they sat together on the couch, the room dimly lit by the warm glow of a single lamp, and Emily felt an overwhelming sense of closeness, a sense that she could tell him everything and he would still be there, unjudging, patient, present. And as the night deepened, their conversation drifted from casual topics to more personal ones, their voices soft, their laughter mingling with the patter of rain, and she realized that she was falling for him, a slow, undeniable pull that filled her chest with warmth and anticipation, a mixture of hope and fear, excitement and caution, because while the bond they shared was beautiful, it also scared her, the idea that someone could touch her heart so completely and yet so delicately, that someone she had just met could become so important to her so quickly, and Lucas, sitting beside her, seemed to feel the same unspoken tension, the way his gaze lingered just a little too long, the way his smile held something deeper than friendship, a quiet longing that matched her own, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, just sat there, letting the silence carry meaning. letting the electricity between them hum in the air, letting the couch become a space of intimacy, trust, and unspoken possibility, and Emily's thoughts raced, imagining what it would be like if this connection could evolve, if he could become more than a comforting presence, if the laughter and stories and quiet nights could transform into something deeper, something lasting, something real, and yet she held back, unsure if she should risk it, unsure if she was ready to let someone into her life so fully again, unsure if she was ready to feel so much and risk heartbreak, and Lucas seemed to sense her hesitation, reaching gently for her hand, letting their fingers brush together lightly, a small gesture that spoke volumes, and Emily's heart fluttered at the contact, a mixture of hope, fear, and undeniable attraction, and as the night went on, they shared stories of past heartbreaks, past mistakes, moments that had shaped them, and each story only drew them closer, each confession building trust, empathy, and intimacy, and Emily realized she had never allowed herself to be this vulnerable, had never felt this level of understanding and acceptance with anyone else, and she wondered if he felt the same, if he felt the way her chest tightened when he smiled, when he leaned in to listen, when he laughed, when he simply existed in her space with such ease and authenticity, and the thought thrilled her and terrified her at the same time, because opening her heart again was not something she did lightly, and yet it felt natural with him, as if she had known him far longer than she had, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together in this small apartment, on this simple couch, on this quiet night, and she laughed softly to herself at the thought, a mixture of disbelief and delight, and Lucas smiled, noticing the laugh, and she felt a wave of warmth flood her chest at the attention, at the ease between them, at the way it felt like the world outside had faded, leaving only the two of them, the rain, the dim light, and the small, perfect space they had created together. And then he reached out again, this time resting his hand lightly over hers, a gesture of comfort, of connection, of tentative intimacy, and Emily felt her breath catch, her heart pounding, the ache of longing she had tried to suppress for months finally making itself known in full force, and she realized that this was more than comfort, more than friendship, more than simple companionship, this was the beginning of something profound, something that might change her life, and she wondered if he felt it too, if he was as drawn to her as she was to him, if he, too, had felt the spark the moment they met, the spark that had quietly grown into this undeniable, magnetic pull, and as they sat there together, talking, laughing, and occasionally falling into reflective silence, Emily felt a mixture of fear and hope, anticipation and uncertainty, a roller coaster of emotions that left her both exhilarated and nervous, because she knew that letting herself care so deeply for someone could be risky, could hurt, could leave her vulnerable in ways she wasn't sure she could handle, and yet she couldn't stop herself from leaning in a little closer, from savoring the warmth of his hand, from listening to the softness of his voice, from allowing herself to imagine a future where he was a permanent part of her life, someone she could rely on, trust, and love, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a mixture of relief and longing, because she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be truly understood, to be valued for who she was, to be seen, and Lucas, sensing her shift in mood, gave a small, reassuring squeeze of her hand, the kind of gesture that carried no words yet communicated everything, understanding, patience, care, and perhaps a hint of the same longing he must have felt, and Emily let herself relax into the sensation, allowing herself to feel hope, to feel desire, to feel the tentative beginnings of love, and the night stretched on, filled with laughter, shared stories, quiet moments, and gentle touches, a tapestry of intimacy woven from trust, comfort, and undeniable attraction, and Emily realized that she was no longer alone, that the couch was no longer just a place to sit, but a space where hearts could meet, where emotions could unfold, where the possibility of something extraordinary could begin, and as Lucas finally stood to leave, she felt a pang of longing, wishing the night didn't have to end, and he paused at the door, looking back at her with a soft, meaningful smile, and in that smile, Emily saw a reflection of her own feelings, hesitation, hope, longing, and the promise that this was only the beginning, that the connection they had formed on the couch could grow into something far greater if they dared to explore it, and with a gentle wave and a whispered "see you tomorrow," he left, and Emily sat on the couch, her heart racing, her mind spinning, feeling the warmth of his presence lingering in the room, and she realized that life had suddenly shifted in the most unexpected way, that a simple gesture of kindness, a few shared moments on a couch, had opened the door to possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine, and she couldn't wait to see what would come next. The thought of him filling her with anticipation, excitement, and a quiet, tender hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who could be more than a friend, someone who could be the support she had longed for, someone who could change her life in ways she never expected, just as Emily had started to feel a quiet certainty in the connection she shared with Lucas. Life threw a shadow across the small bubble they had created, a shadow that made her heart clench and her mind spin with uncertainty, because one afternoon, while she was tidying her apartment and thinking about the next time she would see him, Lucas mentioned something in passing about an old relationship, someone who had once held a significant part of his life but who had left a mark that had not entirely healed, and Emily felt a sudden pang in her chest, a mixture of fear, confusion, and the first real taste of insecurity she had allowed herself to feel since he had entered her life, and she couldn't help the questions that immediately flooded her mind. Was she just a comfort for him? Was she merely filling a space left behind by someone else? Did he feel the same way she did, or was she imagining it, letting her heart race for something that might never truly exist? And she realized that for the first time, she was afraid to see him, afraid that the safe, warm feeling she had cherished on the couch could vanish in an instant, leaving her heart raw and exposed. And so, for a few days, she avoided him, staying inside, keeping herself busy with work, with errands, anything to distract from the growing storm inside her. But no matter what she did, her mind kept returning to him, to the way he laughed, to the gentle way he listened, to the warmth of his presence that had made her apartment feel like a home for the first time in months, and she missed him intensely, though she refused to admit it even to herself, because admitting it meant acknowledging the vulnerability she had tried so hard to avoid. And Lucas noticed the absence immediately, sensing the distance that had crept between them, the slight hesitation in her texts, the shortness of her replies, and he couldn't let it go, couldn't stand the thought that a misunderstanding or unspoken fear could drive a wedge between them, and so he left a small note at her door, simple and gentle, a few handwritten words that carried the weight of understanding and patience. I know life feels complicated. I'm here when you're ready. Emily found the note hours later, her hands trembling as she unfolded the paper, the soft warmth of his inked words hitting her like a gentle wave, and tears pricked at her eyes as she read it over and over, feeling a mixture of relief, guilt, and longing, because the note reminded her that he wasn't gone, that he was still there, still willing to wait, still willing to be patient, still willing to care for her even when she had pulled away, and the thought overwhelmed her, made her heart ache with both love and fear, because she wanted to reach out to him, wanted to tell him how much he meant, how much she had come to rely on him, how much she had come to care, but the old, familiar fear held her back. The fear that loving or trusting someone so completely could lead to disappointment, could lead to heartbreak, could leave her feeling more alone than she had ever felt before, and so she sat in her apartment for hours, clutching the note, staring at the couch where they had shared so many quiet, intimate moments, feeling the echo of his presence linger like a ghost, and every memory brought with it both warmth and pain, the comfort of his voice, the gentle pressure of his hand on hers, the way his eyes seemed to see straight through to her heart, and the fear that it might not last, that it might have been a fleeting moment, a beautiful illusion, filled her chest with tension she could barely breathe through, and she wondered if he felt the same way about her, if he worried that she might drift away, if he feared losing her too, and the thought made her stomach twist with both longing and guilt, because she knew that she had created this distance out of fear, and yet she also knew that the distance hadn't erased the connection, hadn't erased the bond they had built, hadn't erased the way her heart leapt when she thought of him, the way she had started to dream of a life where he was a constant presence, where he was the one who understood her without words, where he was the person she could rely on through the highs and lows of life. And finally, after days of quiet struggle, Emily decided she couldn't continue to hide from her feelings, couldn't continue to let fear dictate her actions, and so she returned to the apartment, her heart pounding, her hands slightly shaking, wondering if he would be angry, disappointed, or simply waiting patiently. And when she opened the door, he was there, standing by the small kitchen counter, casually leaning, as if he hadn't noticed the days she had pulled away, and his eyes met hers with that familiar warmth, that soft, knowing look that made her stomach flutter. And for a moment, neither spoke, just letting the silence fill the room, letting the weight of everything unspoken hang between them, letting the tension build and release in small, subtle ways, the way a brush of fingers against a coffee cup, the way a shift of weight, the way a quiet smile could communicate so much, and Emily realized in that instant that despite the shadow of doubt, despite the fear that had kept her away, Lucas had remained, had waited, had not judged, had not abandoned. And her chest filled with a mixture of relief and gratitude that left her almost breathless, and as he stepped forward, gently offering her the space beside him on the couch, she felt tears prick at her eyes, tears of both joy and vulnerability, because she knew this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she would let herself feel again, fully and without hesitation, because the connection they shared was too important, too rare, too meaningful to be abandoned over fear, and she sat down, her hand brushing his lightly, a simple gesture that carried all the weight of the emotions swirling between them, and he looked at her with that same quiet, tender expression, one that seemed to say, "I understand. I am here. I am not going anywhere," and Emily felt a wave of calm wash over her, a reassurance she had been craving, a sense that the bond they had formed was strong enough to survive uncertainty, strong enough to survive fear, strong enough to grow into something more, if they allowed it to. And for hours, they sat together, talking softly, sharing small stories, laughing at the tiniest jokes, recalling memories of past hardships, of heartbreaks and disappointments, and each word, each laugh, each shared glance only drew them closer, weaving an invisible thread of trust, of intimacy, of care, stronger than either had anticipated, and Emily realized that this was what she had been missing, what her heart had been longing for. A person who could sit beside her without rushing, who could listen without judging, who could make her feel safe even when the world felt heavy, who could become not just a friend but a presence she could rely on, someone who could hold a space in her heart without fear or hesitation. And Lucas, sensing her tentative emotions, reached out again, this time resting his hand lightly over hers, a gesture so tender and simple, yet it carried an entire universe of unspoken meaning, trust, comfort, hope, attraction, and the quiet promise of something deeper, something more, something lasting. And Emily felt her heart swell, the tension in her chest easing into a warmth that filled her completely, as if the weight of loneliness and fear had finally been lifted, if only for this moment. And she realized that life, in all its unpredictability, had led her to this person, to this connection, to this fragile yet powerful bond that had begun with something as simple as sharing cookies on a couch and had grown into something far more profound, far more meaningful, far more alive. And as the night deepened, and the city outside her window glowed with distant lights, Emily knew that this was only the beginning, that the challenges and doubts that life would throw at them were not enough to break the connection they had built, and she felt a quiet, determined hope rise within her, a hope that no matter what happened, they had discovered something rare, something precious, something worth nurturing. And she leaned slightly into him, feeling the reassuring warmth of his presence, feeling the pulse of emotions between them, feeling the slow, undeniable growth of love and trust. And in that moment, she knew with a clarity that surprised her that Lucas had become more than just a comforting presence, more than just a friend, more than someone who filled the quiet spaces of her life. He had begun to become the support, the anchor, the person she had unknowingly been searching for, the person she didn't just want beside her, but the person she needed. And she realized that letting herself feel this way, letting herself hope, letting herself trust, was the bravest and most rewarding choice she could make. And as the night ended, with the soft glow of the lamp casting gentle shadows across the room, Emily felt the quiet thrill of anticipation for what was to come, for the unfolding of something extraordinary that had begun on the couch, something that neither of them had planned, something that had grown quietly, steadily, and undeniably into a connection that would shape the days, nights, and perhaps even the future of both their lives. Emily's heart raced as she returned to her apartment after days of hesitation, carrying a quiet mix of nervousness and hope, because she knew she had to confront the feelings she had been holding back. And when she opened the door, Lucas was already there, standing casually in the kitchen, leaning against the counter. But the moment their eyes met, all hesitation and distance melted away, and the air seemed to hum with anticipation, with unspoken words, with the kind of tension that made her chest flutter and her stomach twist in the most thrilling way. And for a long moment, they simply looked at each other, letting the silence carry the weight of all they hadn't said, letting the familiarity of shared laughter and tender moments fill the space between them, and Emily felt a wave of relief that he hadn't given up, that he had waited, that he was still here, that he still cared, that he still wanted to be part of her life despite the shadows of doubt that had briefly separated them. And as she stepped further inside, Lucas motioned toward the couch, that simple, worn couch that had witnessed the beginnings of something extraordinary, inviting her to sit beside him, and she did, her hands brushing lightly against his as she settled in, a small, electrifying contact that made her heart leap, and they started to talk, softly at first, carefully choosing their words, sharing stories of the days they had spent apart, the thoughts and fears that had kept them from seeing each other, the longing that had grown quietly while distance kept them separated, and Emily realized that talking to him, being with him, was like breathing after a long, suffocating pause, that she had missed him more than she had dared to admit, that her heart had never stopped thinking about him, and Lucas listened intently, his expression calm yet full of warmth, nodding at the right moments, offering quiet affirmations that reminded her why she had trusted him in the first place, why she had let him into her life, why she had allowed herself to feel so deeply for someone she had only recently met, and as the minutes stretched into hours, the conversation grew more intimate, more revealing, more full of honesty, until words alone could not convey the depth of connection that had formed between them, and Emily felt the pull of emotions she had tried to contain, the mixture of relief, joy, desire, hope, and fear swirling within her like a storm tempered by calm, and Lucas, sensing the shift, reached gently for her hand, his fingers threading through hers, a touch that spoke volumes without needing to speak a single word, and Emily felt her breath catch, her heart pounding in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying, because in that moment, she realized that this was more than comfort, more than companionship, more than friendship, this was the beginning of something deeper, something lasting, something real, something that could fill the empty spaces in both their lives with warmth, understanding, and love, and she allowed herself to lean slightly closer, feeling the safety, the trust, the gentle thrill of being so close to someone who had become an anchor in her life, someone whose presence could calm the chaos within her, and Lucas's eyes met hers with the same intensity, the same quiet promise, the same awareness that they were standing at the edge of a new chapter together, a chapter neither had fully dared to imagine but both had longed for, and as the night deepened, they shared dreams they hadn't voiced before. Confessions about past mistakes, moments of vulnerability that made their bond even stronger, laughter that eased the tension of unspoken fears, and soft touches that hinted at emotions too big for words, and Emily realized that she was no longer afraid, that she no longer needed to hide behind walls of caution or fear, that allowing herself to feel, to hope, to trust, had brought her closer to the person she had been quietly searching for all her life, and Lucas, sensing her openness, smiled gently, his hand still holding hers, and whispered, with a sincerity that made her chest ache with emotion, that he had come to realize she wasn't just someone to lean on, but someone who had become essential to him, someone whose presence he needed, whose laugh, whose words, whose quiet strength had filled his own life with meaning he hadn't realized was missing. And Emily's eyes glistened with tears of joy, relief, and tenderness, because hearing the words she had hoped for, feeling the confirmation of the emotions she had been too nervous to fully claim, made her heart swell in a way that was both overwhelming and comforting, and she responded not with words at first but with a soft, grateful smile, letting the warmth of their connection speak for itself, letting the gentle pressure of their hands, the closeness of their bodies on the couch, the shared breaths, convey the depth of feeling that had grown quietly, steadily, but undeniably between them, and as they continued to talk, the room seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the small, intimate space of the couch, the glow of the lamp, and the shared heartbeat of two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way, and Emily felt a quiet laughter rise in her chest, a mixture of relief, joy, and disbelief that something so simple, something as ordinary as a couch in a small apartment, could become the place where her life had shifted, where her heart had opened, where the possibilities of love, trust, and partnership had begun to unfold, and Lucas, noticing the spark in her eyes, leaned slightly closer, not in a rush, not in a demand, but in a gentle, patient acknowledgement of the unspoken emotions between them, a movement that made her pulse race, that made her chest tighten in anticipation and delight, because in that single, unhurried gesture, he communicated everything: patience, care, desire, understanding, and the quiet promise of a shared future. And Emily responded. Instinctively, her hand squeezing his, her body leaning subtly toward him, feeling the thrill of being so close, feeling the comfort of knowing he was there, feeling the profound impact of realizing that someone could understand her, cherish her, and need her in return. And as the night wore on, they continued to share, continued to laugh, continued to explore the unspoken boundaries and possibilities of a relationship that had begun as something small but was growing into something extraordinary. And Emily realized that she had never felt so alive, so connected, so truly herself with another person. And Lucas, mirroring her thoughts, realized the same, that she had become indispensable to him, that her presence filled a void he hadn't fully acknowledged before, that the bond they had formed on the couch, through shared laughter, quiet conversations, tender gestures, and mutual vulnerability, had blossomed into a connection that neither wanted to let go, that both were willing to nurture, to protect, to grow. And Emily, feeling a sense of courage and clarity, finally let herself voice what had been simmering inside for weeks, whispering softly, almost afraid to break the spell of the moment, that she had come to need him too, that she had come to trust him, that she had come to care in ways that went beyond friendship. And Lucas's eyes softened, the faintest smile touching his lips, and he whispered back, confirming everything she had hoped, reassuring her that this was real, that they were real, that their hearts had quietly found each other and were ready to explore what it could mean to be together fully. And Emily felt tears spill down her cheeks, a mixture of relief, happiness, and quiet awe at the journey they had taken to reach this moment, the journey that had started with a knock on her door, a plate of cookies, and a simple evening on a couch. And she realized that life had a way of surprising her, of delivering connection, trust, and love in the most unexpected, gentle, and profound ways. And as they leaned back together on the couch, hands entwined, sharing laughter, soft words, and the comfort of simply being in each other's presence, Emily felt a quiet certainty settle in her heart, a sense that this was only the beginning, that the days ahead would be filled with shared moments, challenges, joys, and growth, and that no matter what came, they had discovered something rare, something precious, something worth protecting and cherishing. And she let herself close her eyes for a moment, savoring the warmth, the comfort, the connection, the hope, and the love that had grown quietly but powerfully between them. And as the first light of dawn filtered through her window, illuminating the room and casting soft shadows across the couch, Emily knew that Lucas had become more than a presence in her life, more than a friend, more than someone to lean on. He had become the support, the anchor, the companion, and perhaps even the love she had been quietly searching for, the person who made her heart feel full, her life feel brighter, and her future feel filled with possibility. And as they shared that quiet morning together, neither needing to speak, simply existing in the comfort of each other's presence, Emily realized that sometimes the most extraordinary love begins in the simplest of places, with the smallest of gestures. And in that moment, on that couch, she knew that they had found something extraordinary, fragile yet strong, tender yet unshakable, a love worth nurturing, cherishing, and growing. And she felt a deep, quiet joy knowing that this story, their story, was only just beginning.